The ultimate weapon in doors is the Crucifix, a wooden shaft that breaks apart upon contact with even the slightest touch, and when that happens it summons a glowing spectacle of bright blue chains that drag any of its nearby victims straight into the ground. As the game's most iconic item, I was curious to figure out how exactly the Crucifix worked. Did it actually kill any of the creatures that came in contact with it, or does it just merely teleport them? What makes this thing tick, and why does it function differently depending on the entity that's being crucified? Well, I did some digging, and I discovered that despite this item's life-saving property indoors, it hides an incredibly dark secret which many of you probably never noticed. In this video, we'll be going on a deep dive into the door's Crucifix, and exposing its terrifying hidden truth. So, with all of that being said, let's begin. Alright, so I'm pretty sure all of you watching have a basic idea of how the Crucifix works from a gameplay standpoint. Once obtained and held in front of an entity, that entity will be crucified. The item breaks apart to reveal a glowing blue inner core, a sigil forms under the entity, and chains emerge from the ground which drag the creature into the floor. The Crucifix serves as a way to cheat death, to destroy a monster that was just about to kill you. However, there is one big mystery that remains with this item, and that is what happens to the entity after it is crucified. All we see is it being dragged into the ground, but what occurs after that? Well, my research has come up with one single conclusion. The Crucifix, contrary to popular belief, doesn't actually kill its victims, except for one very morbid case which I'll get to later. However, it at the same time isn't a painless process. Whenever an entity is crucified, they scream out in agony. I mean, who wouldn't? Their body is pierced with several chains, and they are dragged into the physical ground against their will. In no way are the crucified entities getting off scot-free. However, like I just said, I don't think they are actually killed by the item, and that is due to one main reason. You see, all entities indoors fit into two main categories, those being they are singular beings or they are species. Entities such as Figure and Seek are singular beings. Only one of them exists in the entire Doors world, and every time we meet them, it's the exact same creature. Other entities such as Gloombats, Monuments, and Dupe are species, meaning multiple exist within the world. Differentiating which entities fall into which category is vital to understanding how the Crucifix works, as it determines whether or not the item actually kills its victims, which of course is important to what we are trying to decipher in this video. If you crucify a one-of-a-kind entity and the Crucifix doesn't fail, however that entity returns later in the playthrough, that means the Crucifix didn't actually kill them, as they have the capability of reappearing. Instead, it likely just teleported them away and that entity found you again. In case you forgot, for certain entities, the Crucifix can't successfully banish them. Instead, the item glows red instead of blue, and the entity is able to break free rather than being pulled into the ground. Why the Crucifix turns red and what it means is a topic for another day, but that's just a quick explanation as to what I mean by the Crucifix failing. It sounds pretty straightforward, however that's until you realize it's a lot harder to find an example of this in-game. Creatures known for a fact to be one of a kind, such as Seek, Figure, and the Queen Grumble, all cause the Crucifix to fail immediately, so they can't be used to draw a conclusion. This means we have to rely on entities which we can only assume are one of a kind but not directly confirmed. And fortunately, there are a couple examples of that, so let's look at those. For one, Haste and Louie are often thought of only existing as themselves and not being part of a wider species. After crucifying Haste, they can definitely still return, and after crucifying Louie, they can also still return. It's actually programmed for Louie to spawn at least twice in a Mines playthrough most of the time, so I would use that as evidence. Sally could also follow this logic, and we actually know for certain that they are one of a kind, but given the entity's unreliable spawning nature and altered spawn rates over time, I wouldn't say using them is the best source of evidence. Additionally, entities such as Rush and Ambush have no tangible evidence supporting that they are species, so if it's assumed they are one of a kind, and they definitely can return after being crucified, then that could also be evidence for the Crucifix not resulting in immediate death. Now, there is one pretty big oddity with this, and that is the eyes and Lookman entities. When you crucify these guys, they can't actually spawn for the remainder of the playthrough, almost as if the Crucifix permanently killed them for the rest of the run. I'm also pretty sure Dread is like this as well, where after you crucify them, they can no longer spawn, even if their spawning conditions are met. The thing is though, this could actually be a bug according to the developers. It currently isn't known if this is an intentional feature or not. So at least for this video, I won't be counting these examples as evidence, as they may be unintentional. I'd also like to mention that Eyes is confirmed to be a species of entities, given how we can encounter multiple with modifiers, which are in fact canon, and that could reduce the credibility of this evidence supporting that the Crucifix kills entities as a whole. It is pretty interesting though, and if this thing is intentional, I'd assume it's a balancing feature for the Crucifix, as crucifying these entities on their own isn't that worthwhile. However, if it removed them from the remainder of the run, that is probably worthwhile. So, does that settle it? The Crucifix just transports entities to new locations rather than killing them? Well, although that seems to be true in most cases, there's a pretty dark one where the Crucifix actually kills its victim. When you use a Crucifix on Dupe, and only on Dupe, something really odd happens. As the dust settles, Dupe's door will open to reveal the inside of their body. Where their face and hands were is no more, but instead, all that remains is a giant cavity inside of what was their head, as well as stringy remains and what's left of the entity's hands and esophagus. All other entities are merely transported to a new location by the Crucifix, but Dupe is beheaded by it, decapitated and left lying there. Why does this happen? Well, I think I've pieced together the puzzle. Also, I'd just like to mention that given Dupe's overall body shape, I assume this is a form of decapitation. I'm not entirely sure what Dupe's true body looks like, but given how their head and what's behind it was removed, I'll just call this decapitation for the remainder of this video. You see, Dupe is canonically a giant entity. If we observe the inside of their body in the room, it towers leagues over the player, and it's implied to extend even farther. The Crucifix seems to only affect whatever is inside of its circular sigil, dragging anything on top of it into the ground. So here's my theory. Whenever you crucify Dupe, the sigil isn't made large enough to transport the entire entity's body, so instead it just transports their head, leaving the rest of the body where it once was. This acts as a method of decapitation, as the head of Dupe is forced to separate from the rest of the body, acting as a dark and grisly twist to the item supposed to save your life. This is the hidden story of the Door's Crucifix. It's a weapon which, although intended to just transport entities away from you, can sometimes transport only a part of an entity, leading to that part effectively being chopped off, and in the case of Dupe, it was their entire head and whatever was behind it. I hope you enjoyed that little glimpse into the true nature of this game. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.